Welcome back, everybody. This is the second broadcast of Arctic Fire 2012. Earlier you heard from Don Fogg, a grand master, if we can call him that, smith, and I learned some great stuff on hand polishing techniques. I'm going next, or this time rather. I'm going to be talking about a cool pattern that is made from something called Crush W's. If you tuned into some of our test broadcasts, you remember I went over some of this basic technique, but I'm going to go ahead. We had enough time to go over the basic foundation pattern of this, and I've got it all in slides and photos now, so no hot work demonstration this time, but I think you'll be able to understand the concept a little bit easier this way. A couple of quick housekeeping announcements. Reminder, you saw the promo when it started, but we wanted to plug that the Middle-earth Network has been sponsoring this event. They built us a great website, and thanks to all the founders, John DiBortolo and so on, for this. We're putting on a contest at on the 28th just for fun, where we're going to get 3 teams of these awesome bladesmiths together, and we're going to make a railroad spike knife, each team. And there will be a random question on Tolkien that I ask tomorrow. The first 3 people that email in the right answer to that question will win these 3 railroad spike knives. And these are going to be rare collector's items. I don't think you'll ever find another railroad spike that would be collaborated on by, Jake Poning and David Delagardelle and so on. So this is going to be a pretty neat collector's item. So don't forget, that's on the 28th at 6 o'clock Alaska time. So that's 10 o'clock p.m. East Coast time. And tonight at 10 o'clock p.m. there's going to be a radio interview with myself and at least a couple of the Smiths from here. Peter Johnson has graciously agreed to be one of the guests, and that will be on the Founders Inklings. If you go to the Middle-earth Network, if you're already a member, I'm sure you're already familiar with it. You can tune into that radio show and ask questions in the chat room and hear some more deep philosophy related to swords and bladesmithing. So, and yeah, okay, that's it. Then the last. So what let's start with this. I'm going to be teaching you guys how to make this very cool pattern. I'm going to say it a couple of times because I don't want to take credit where I didn't do it. This is a Mick Maxon design. It's a beautiful star pattern that is what they call a mosaic pattern, and it can be used for bolsters or the blade itself. And you can see it's really thinking outside the box in terms of this. And then I took a variation on this and I made this blade, which I'm calling Flaming Edge pattern because I couldn't think of anything better. So it's pretty cool. I'm just going to walk you through what are Crush W's? Again, how are they different than the base foundation sequence of just straight laminate, and then how we got this specific effects here. So this is a diagram. Have it pick it up, and it demonstrates exactly what's going on when we have W's. You see we start out with a straight laminate layer, right? And normally what we do at this point is we draw that laminate layer out and fold it back on itself, doubling the layers, just like imagine if you had a really long narrow book and cut it in half, you just double the number of pages, right? So that's what we do. But what we do with Crush W's to make things interesting is we wait until the layers are about 30 is where I like to do it, but it really depends on the smith's personal taste. And you can say you rotate it 90 degrees. Now you've got lines up and down. So if you can imagine, if I were to look at the top of the bar now, so if this is the bar that I've flattened, you've got on the end, you've got these stripes, and on the surface, you're going to have stripes running this way. So if we then cut that in the middle and stack it on top of itself, what do you end up with? But you have this. And of course, these are not going to line up perfectly. And so what happens is, as you continue to stack and crush, you end up with these interesting squiggly lines. And that's basically what the concept of Crush W's is, instead of starting with straight lines, let's start with squiggly lines to give the pattern a more organic feel. And you can see this is a photo of a billet that I made up and etched the end on, just so you can see the W starting to crush there. You can see as the billet compresses, and you can see there's a little bit more compression on the edges. That has to do with the way that I work the steel in the forge. And you can see those edges starting to create those interesting squiggly lines. Now this I then squished down, that's the technical term, squished, and drew it out again to where it's long and narrow into a bar. And this is what it looked like after the next weld. You can see now we've got much tighter W's in there. That becomes, and this is on the end of the bar, you have to remember. So if this, imagine if I had this long, you remember that this pattern is on the end. I should be showing this camera. The pattern is on the end, which in all mosaic patterns, that's the challenge. You've got an interesting pattern on the end, and one of the things that I'll caution you on if you do W's is grind and etch between welding steps. I can't tell you how many people have told me, Peter told me a story about this, just that, I did this wonderful feather and I forgot to rotate it, or I forgot which end it was on, so I ended up with this beautiful blade where the end of the tang had a great little design on it, but nothing on the blade. And that can be very frustrating if you spent several hours in the forge. Yeah, days, right? So here's the thing, just to make you see what it looks like before it's drawn out. You can see I welded almost like a hammer. This is how now I'm going to take those W's and get them on the surface. Right? And here's the shot of what it looks like. You can see that this is a pattern that needs to be revealed through grinding in order to reveal the W's. If you look at this bar towards the end where it's flat, you can see we have relatively uninteresting straight lines. But as we grind into that, those W's are revealed, and that's where we start getting some interesting effects. And to give you a couple examples of patterns I've done, that's a boot dagger I did with crushed W's, and that's one I kind of drew it out a lot. So the W's, and that's a coarse pattern, so it's not very high layer. And so the W's are kind of these long, jagged W's instead of the squiggly ones as you stretch it out. And I thought that looked good in this kind of wicked boot dagger thing. Example of what happens when you take W's and twist them and then grind into them. This is called an explosion pattern, and you can see that is much more interesting. You can see there on the top bevel there's 3, and on the bottom bevel there's just about 4 of these stars. Now if you're familiar at all with Damascus steel and patterns, you'll know that when you twist straight layers and grind them, you have these very distinct stars. They're shaped very much like this almost. So look for that shape in that pattern, and you'll see that shape exists, but it's made of these wonderful squiggly exploding looking lines, and so you get a much more organic feel to your pattern. So I really like crushed W's. I like the way it makes the Damascus feel. There's no reason you can't go extremely high layer. That is a feathered billet that I did. And a feather, by the way, is an interesting and rather frustrating pattern to try. Feathered billet is when you actually create these this crushed W, and you've got your W's running through here like this, and with a very dull cutter, when the billet's hot, you hot cut through with about 3/4 of the way through, and then you immediately flux and push it back in and forge weld it back together. All right, so now you have a weld like there, and it wants to fall apart every 6 ways from Sunday there. But imagine if you had a big stack of American and Swiss cheese and a really dull butter knife, and you just drug that knife through the cheese, and then you push the block back together. You notice that kind of smearing you're going to see? That's the feather, right? And so this is a 1,000+ layer W's with a feather cut in it. I like it. It almost looks like hair or something. So that's basic crushed W's. What I'm going to talk about today are 2 variations on crushed W's. This is very innovative thinking, and Don actually put a link to this pattern. I think it was over on Blade Forums maybe over a year ago, 2 years ago, saying, check out this design by Mix Max, and this is really thinking outside the box. And I remember clicking on the link and just gasping like, holy cow! I almost I almost said not cow there. We're live. But holy cow, this is amazing. I really want to learn how to make this. And so I practiced with it a little bit, and I figured it out, and I thought it would be something that I would share with the rest of the forum and all of you joining us from Middle Earth Network to see how these things actually come into being. So the variation on the W's is, the first thing you do is you start with a very, very uneven layer count on the initial billet. So you see normally when you lay out a billet of steel, you lay it out with approximately even, so you got one layer of, let's say 1095, another layer of 15N20, 1095, 15N20, so on and so forth. Well, this, I have a diagram that shows this better. This is the layout initially of this billet. So I literally start out with 8 layers of 1/4 inch thick 1070, which etches dark, and I find it etches a little bit darker than 1095. Then you end up with 2 layers of 1/8 inch thick 1095, which is also dark but slightly less dark on etch than the 1070, and then alternating 10 layers of 1/16 inch thick 1095 and 15N20. So that little tiny bit in the bottom is like a normal billet, but you've got this big stack of darker homogeneous material. If you could find a chunk of 1070 was that thick, it would actually even be better, so you wouldn't have to weld those together. But I just couldn't find a piece of 1070 that was that thick. So this is what it looks like after you weld it together, right? So you have a very big black surface on top, and you get these wavy lines in the bottom. You can see it's starting to create a little bit of a U there at the bottom as the W's are starting to form. So this is like one little layer of all those crushed W's you saw in my earlier examples. So then what you do is you draw that out, and I chopped it into 3 chunks, but you could do more than that. And you lay out the billet like this. Note that the X's on top are very important to this. If you were to accident, because there's no way, if you don't etch between, for you to remember which way is up. So if you were to rotate one of those upside down and weld back, you might as well start over again, right? So you always make sure that the orientation is remembered. So I was pretty paranoid about this. So this is what it ends up looking like after that welding operation. So you can see these peaks are starting to form. And again, keep track of the orientation. Do it again. I did 4 at this time, but again, you can increase this by creating the stack higher. I don't imagine this is something that would be possible. I don't know, it would not be easy with hand hammers only. You're going to want a hydraulic press or a power hammer or something like that, because these are pretty thick billets we're working with here. And this is what it looks like. I'm sorry about the angle. This is the best photo I had. This is what it's starting to look like now. These really tight peaks. So with this billet, what I did was I then divided it into 2 separate billets. I figured I was going to do one of these, and I had an idea about how to, there's a type of blade, if you're not familiar with it, it's called sanmai. And that's where you take 3 layers of steel, maybe something dark on the outside and a different layer in the middle, and when you grind the edge on, you can etch it, and it has this interesting joint that creates almost like what looks like a hamon, which is a specific Japanese temper line that you can bring out. And I've always liked that effect, but it's just not quite complicated enough for me. I like a lot of complications in my patterns. And so I thought, well, I want to crush W's, but only halfway up, almost like a sanmai effect. So I said, I think I can do this using this theory that Mick put together. So let me look at my notes here. Yeah. Okay, again, it's very important for you to remember the orientation of your handle. If you're welding a handle on, remember that in the top diagram here, this is what we're working with. You've got the edge, if you look back here, the pattern's on the end of those, see? But when you're going to make this, you're going to have to reposition your handle such that the flame is here. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a little tiny design here on the end of the tang. just like Peter did, right? So the orientation on this is, and don't trust your memory. Don't look at the pattern when it's that, when you pull something out of the fire, you can kind of see the pattern you will fool yourself. Take it up to, just give it a 120 quick, up to 120 grit, and then dip it in the ferric chloride really quickly so you can prove to yourself, yes, that is the top layer. Okay. So again, this is what ends up happening when I drew that out, and I thought it looks rather cool. Now, one of the things I don't like about it, and I would love to have a thicker piece of 1070 to start with, is I don't know if the camera can pick this out, but there are little tiny, it looks like spider webs in the black material, and that is where the welds happen between this. Now, actually, there was a bit of a discussion and debate with the bladesmiths here last night about why does this happen? Why is it that the joint between two materials creates these interesting webs? And I don't think, did we come up with a definitive answer? I mean, if these guys don't know, I don't know if anybody does. But if you know the answer, let us know, will you? At any rate, I think this might look good being hot blued, perhaps, because with a deep enough etch, you could hot blue this and then use very fine sanding on the surface to bring this out, and maybe that would, disguise, if you will, these little webs. So that is how I did this, but let's move on to getting to the mosaic tile. So going back to the first billet, here's the variation number 2 on the crush W's. Remember, the whole concept of crush W's is you rotate 90 degrees, something they call forging on the bias. Well, we've done that, and we've got these, we've got this, right? I'm pausing so that this actually catches up on the internet. And now we forge that into a square, and we rotate it not 90 degrees, but 45 degrees. And you can see now we've got this corner burst that happens. And again, this is the part where you really, really need to pay attention to orientation, because if you screwed this next part up, you'd really kick yourself after all the work it took to get here. All right? You lay it out like that. And again, and what I did, and I don't know if you can see on the back, I literally just welded an X across the back side of it to put the handle on. And I welded this up with hand hammers initially because I was afraid of distorting it too much on the press. Right? I ended up actually narrowing it just a little bit, but be careful not to distort this too much. You want to put these things together relatively gently. All right? And there is a good photo of what it ends up as. So what I planned to do, and I still plan on doing, but I'm not, I didn't get around to it, but so you guys will get these through the mail. I'm going to take this down to a local machine shop and that has a water knife, have them cut these off about 1/8-inch thick slices of this. And I'm going to etch Arctic Fire onto the back of these. These will be commemorative coins that you all will get one for attending Arctic Fire. And I thought that was a neat use for this, So, and that's it. I just flew through that in 20 minutes. Guys have any questions or comments, guys? Guess not. Yes, Peter.
But I think it's one of the greatest assets when you have those things happening in the background. So it's not just this solid black surface,
right,
but you have an activity on another level there.
That is true, because one of the things I love about sorry. Yeah, the way Peter I had pointed out that I didn't quite like these fine lines that show up here, and Peter makes a good point. One of the things that and those that are on the Bladesmiths forum will know this instantly when I talk about it. Peter had this wonderful sword that he put together. It was what they call a ceremonial sword. There's a nice thread on our forum about it, and I've always admired that piece of yours, Peter, because you can look at it from a distance and the lines are just beautiful, and that's what you're looking at, is the actual profile and the layout of this sword. It's clean, it's functional, it's beautiful, but then the pattern on it is so it's a relatively fine laminate pattern, and so you've got something to look at up close. So you want, I think a really nice balanced piece has both appeal at a distance, and then when you get it in your hands, you say, "Oh, look at that! That's interesting." And then pretty soon you're down here looking at it like this. So I suppose that is true. There's a bit of a mystery web in here, and it tells a story of where the welds happened and how the steel moved. And if you spend a lot of time with red hot steel, there's still we know generally how the steel moves, but I cannot look at this and explain to you why. For example, this will be hard to get, Andy. I don't know if you can get this or not, but take a look at I don't know if they can see that, but right there on the tip, there's this, it just goes like this and then splits. Why would it do that right there, as opposed to just being evenly, spaced web? I don't know. So it's true, Peter. There's a bit of an interesting idea going on in there. It tells the story of how it was made. All right. Anybody else? Yeah.
How much of the material do you grind away to get to the W pattern?
The W patterns on this, after you get to it, is all the way through. So you don't really need the jagged points are already established. So you don't have to, like carve away strata like you do with explosion or something to reveal the W's. So you could, you can actually see on the Ricasso where there's no grinding whatsoever, you still have the same jagged points. So none at all.
Cool.
All right, awesome. Okay, next presentation that is coming up is a very goofy and fun video recorded message from Every Court Needs a Jester. And Sam, who's a very talented blacksmith and bladesmith, and one of the super administrators on Bladesmiths Forum, sent a salutation video, which I think you guys will enjoy quite a bit. It's got Salvetti all over it, so you guys will enjoy this quite a bit. So that's coming up right after this. And then the next broadcast, which I've been looking forward to, is by Jake Pounding. Yeah, I wanted his name to be Poning so bad because it just sounds cool, I mean, it's because the kids nowadays, they say, "Yo, you were pwned," and I thought, man, what a great name to have, but it's Pounding. Pardon me. Jake Pounding's presentation on the sword is coming up at 1 p.m. our time. That's 5 p.m. East Coast time. Tune in for it, and we'll see you then. Thanks a lot.